Be our guest, be our guest. Put our service to the test. Tie your napkin round your neck, cherie, and we'll provide the rest. Soup du jour, hot hors d'oeuvres, why we only live to serve. Try the gray stuff, it's delicious. Don't believe me? Ask the dishes. They can sing, they can dance. After all, miss, this is France. And dinner here is never second best. Go on, unfold your menu, take a glance, and then you'll be our guest. We are guests, be our guest. Life is so unnerving for a servant who's not serving. He's not whole without a soul to wait upon. Ah, those good old days when we were useful. Suddenly those good old days are gone. 10 years we've been rusting, needing so much more than dusting, needing exercise, a chance to use our skills. Most days we just lay around the castle. Flabby, fat, and lazy, you walked in and oopsie-daisy. Be our guest, our command is your request. It's been years since we've had anybody here, and we're obsessed with your meal, with your ease. Yes, indeed, we aim to please. While the candlelight's still glowing, let us help you, we'll keep going. Course by course, one by one, till you shout, enough, I'm done. Then we'll sing you off to sleep as you digest. Tonight you'll have your feet up, but for now let's see you. Be our guest, be our guest, be our guest. Please be our guest.
Are you kidding me? That was amazing.
That was awesome. That's never happened at dinner before.
Yeah, well, I think it was a treat for sure.
Well, it's never happened in church before. Not that song. We're church, just different. I don't usually wear a suit in church either. It's rare. Most folks around here probably have never seen me in one. So we like to stretch a little bit and do things differently. Maybe you've never even heard that song before. You might not know where it came from. Belle was a prisoner. She had sacrificed her freedom to secure her father's, a swap of sorts that landed her in the domain of the beast, who owned and lived in this castle. The beast was secretly a prince, of course. He'd been cast a spell upon him, confined to the repulsive outward appearance of the beast, unless Belle would fall in love with him, without knowing his true identity as a royal. So Beast invites Belle to dinner, hoping to woo her, and she refuses. Instead, later on that day, she wanders into the kitchen. She's hungry, and she's greeted by the enchanted crew. Ms. Potts and Lumiere and the rest of the gang, going against the wishes of their master, the Beast. They served Belle because that's what they do. That's their place. Most of us, when we think of the iconic, now 30-year-old Beauty and the Beast, if we see ourselves, or if we wish to see ourselves in the story, we would be Belle or the prince. They, the royal characters of the story, they're the ones we envy, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to be waited on and doted over and served? That's what we're actually going to talk about today. Because if we're going to make this year different, if 2022 is going to be better, then we've got to shift our mindset from thinking only about ourselves. Our goals of losing weight or wasting less time on Facebook or finally living on a budget, those are noble goals. They're good goals. Now, I'm not trying to discount self-improvement in any way. I am, however, trying to abolish selfishness. Self-improvement, yes. Selfishness, no. In fact, we need to be selfless if we're really going to live our best lives. And part of selfless is service. Well, when I am often meeting with people, I think about this question, and I wonder this question about you. How would people describe you if someone was asked, what are they always doing? What is he always doing? What is she always doing? If I asked you, if I asked people around you, what would go in the blank? I do a lot of funerals. And when I do these services for people, I always meet with the family 2 or 3 days, ahead of time. And when I meet with the family, I usually ask them some version of this question. I'll say, if someone walked up to you who didn't know your dad or your husband or your mom or whoever it is had passed away, if somebody walked up to you and didn't know them and said, tell me about her, tell me about him. And the question is, what would you say? I always ask that. What would you say? And that's where the always statement usually comes. I hear these a lot. They'll say, he was always there. He always showed up. Or, and she was always critical. Or she was always positive. Or he was always pessimistic. Or he was always yelling. How would someone describe you? She's always working. He's always telling people about his faith. He's always on his phone. There are lots of ways to answer the question. The question is, what would people say if they were asked that question about you? What is he or she always doing? It's a good question because we live in a world that seems to be completely obsessed with the idea of selfish advancement. In fact, did you know that in a recent poll, 54% of teenagers say that the career that they want when they grow up is not like it was 20 years ago. Most of these kids don't say, I want to be a firefighter or a doctor or a teacher or an engineer. 54% say they want to be a celebrity. A celebrity. Why? Because now you can use a platform that you access from your phone and have nearly direct access to the entire world through Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. And there's story after story of people who are leveraging these channels to get famous and rich. And so the question then is, well, why shouldn't it be me? Now, look, I'm not saying that being famous or rich or both is bad or evil or sinful. I'm not saying that at all. But as a follower of Jesus, knowing that he wants the best life for me, well, I've got to follow his example and his words. Words like, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. So for the follower of Jesus, which is, by the way, what this word disciple means, self-promotion is not the way to life. Self-denial is. Jesus goes on to say, the greatest among you will be my servant. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. We are called, you and I, we're called not to be selfish, but to be selfless. We're supposed to reject a world of self-promotion and embrace a life of self-denial. Our always attitude should be servant, not privileged, not royalty. So serving isn't just something we do. It is something we become. I don't just serve. I am a servant. I identify my life that way. I spent 7.5 years after I graduated from college getting 2 degrees. It was a lot of time, a pretty significant investment. I was glad to finally get to graduation both times. And at both of my graduations, they gave me the same thing. I got an official document in a nice frame with fancy writing and titles like doctor written on them. But it was the other thing that they gave me that had the greatest impact on me. At each ceremony, to every graduate, a simple towel was given. the kind of towel that a waiter drapes over his arm as he takes care of those in his purview. And the message was clear and it was unforgettable. My title as pastor or doctor or leader, the title was far less important than my role, my identity as servant. I wasn't given a crown or a gold ring or a fancy pen. I was given a towel to remind me that self-denial was the way to the best kind of life, that serving others was what I was really called to do. And you know what? This is not limited to the life of a pastor. The towel isn't reserved for seminary graduates, but for all followers of the way of Jesus, the way to life. Because Jesus said, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Something here Jesus is saying is that finding your soul is found through serving others. Serving isn't just something we do. Servant is who we are. I am a servant of others because Jesus was a servant of others, and I want my whole life to be like him. And so I'm going to get to some practical tools, some boots on the ground, real life where we live it kind of application. I'm going to give you that in a minute, but I don't want to move too quickly to the checklist here because the checklist is all about doing. And you know you can serve without having the mind of a servant. Jesus didn't just act like a servant. Though he was God in the flesh, though he was at the top, if you will, he actually claimed the identity of a servant on the bottom. Here's how the Apostle Paul put it. He said, now first Paul is talking to us, and then he's going to tell us about Jesus. So check this out. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. What are you always doing? How would others describe you if they were asked that question about you? What are you always doing? There's this really obscure text in the Bible in the book of Acts that I'm not sure I've ever taught on before, and I've been doing this for a little while. It's very short, but for our context today, it's super important and it's profound. It's squeezed into some other major stories, which is why it's easy to overlook. I want to show it to you. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. I want to just pause here for a second and acknowledge, I know that this is not like a name that never happens these days, but it's not quite a popular name these days. When I was in school, if there was a kid named Dorcas, they would have gotten kind of a hard time. I started thinking about this relative to, what are some strange names, unusual names maybe in the past couple of years. Did you know somebody had a kid and named that child Anomaly? Now think about that for a minute now. If somebody had a baby and named their child Tigger, literally, I'm not kidding. Somebody named their child Sincere. Somebody named their kid Emperor. Somebody named their newborn child Warden. I can only imagine what their brothers were named. And somebody named their kid Bandit. So there are, strange names that happen all the time. And so I'm not dwelling on the fact, but her name was Tabitha. In Greek, it meant Dorcas. And what we're told in Acts is that she was always serving people. She was always doing good and helping the poor. What people really remembered about Dorcas was not her strange name, which, by the way, is not so strange in Greek, but that she was always doing good and helping the poor. You guys okay? You ready for dessert? Now, I don't know about you, but when people are asked, what is Brian always doing? One of my major life goals is that the largest voice, the biggest tally, when people add it up, and I heard the responses, the number one thing that people would say about me if I had my way is that Brian is always helping people, that ultimately he was always serving, and not just as an act of doing, but that he had the attitude of a servant. Why would I feel that way? Well, Jesus said as much, because he tells us in one of the accounts, he says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And as a follower of Jesus, I want to be like Jesus, who turned down what he was entitled to and became what he was called to. So what does it look like for you and me? What does this look like? First, I want to clear the air. Let's get this on the table because somebody's bound to be thinking it. There is nothing wrong with being treated well and waited on and doted over. This past week, Susan and I celebrated our 32nd anniversary. We went out for a nice dinner at a fancy place. We sat at a private table and somebody served us, and there's no sin in that. And I have an amazing assistant who works with me at church. She does a bunch of things that I can do, but that I shouldn't be doing. And I got to tell you, for years, this was a real struggle. It was personally a really hard thing for me to get over. I just couldn't reconcile that I would have somebody working for me doing things that I was capable of doing myself. And I just kept asking, well, why should she print that document? I can do it. Why should she make that call? Why should she pick up those supplies? And I felt guilty about it somehow. And I finally had to recognize that Shelby's calling was to equip me to do what I'm best at, not just for me to keep doing all the things I'm capable of doing. So I mostly have let go of the guilt, mostly. And at the end of the day, Shelby and I both are serving God because we're both serving others. So maybe you've got someone who does things for you that you're capable of doing, like painting your house or mowing your lawn or walking your dog. Whatever it is, it's all good. It's okay. What I'm talking about is an identity that then leads to action. I am a servant. So what do? I serve. And one leads to the other. My identity leads to action. So how can you do this? What are some practical applications? I want to give you 3 practical ways. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a list worth keeping close. So here they are. I'm going to give them all to you. Then we're going to unpack them briefly. Take a meal, send a note, carry a towel. Take a meal, send a note, carry a towel. Take a meal. Perhaps you've heard of King David. David, the iconic figure of manliness who defeated the giant Goliath, and he cut his teeth in wilderness warfare, and he became the beloved leader of the nation of Israel, the second king. And people sang songs about his battle prowess, and they bragged about how many of the enemy David had killed. But before all that, one of the earliest accounts we get of David is when he takes a meal. One day, Jesse said to David is Jesse's son, take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers. This text is often overlooked in order to focus on David's grand achievements, and there are many of them: the conquering, the territory taking, the expanding of the empire of Israel. But David's pathway to significance started with something equally important. It started with service, with taking a meal. It's one of the characteristics that endeared David to his people. He was one of them. He was not above being a servant. He took his brothers a meal. And one of the great ways that we can serve people is to do the same thing. We had our latest Snowmageddon experience this past week here in Virginia, where I live. Now, I know we have a growing part of our church that is in all kinds of other places. Some of you may live far away from Virginia, even in other countries, and you might not know what we've been through here, what I've been through, and others like me. Tens of thousands of people were without power for days. I was one of them. My power went out on Monday. We didn't get it restored for several days. And every night, The temperature was in the teens. It was quite frigid. Now, I do have a generator, and that's something I recorded in my gratitude journal more than one time this week. So my bedroom was warm, and we had water and hot water and the internet, and so. But people I know reached out to us, and they offered help. They offered a place to stay. They offered a ride if I needed a ride, and they offered a meal. That's what we do when people are in need. We take them food. It's one of the simplest ways that we can serve others, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be a full-course meal. But there's something about taking a meal to someone that expresses our care, our servant's heart. It's no secret around here that my wife, Susan, does not enjoy cooking. She never has. She cooks well enough. She just doesn't like doing it. In fact, the only time I ever see her smile when she's cooking is when she's cooking for somebody who's struggling, or a family who's grieving, or for a person in need. Some kind of servant-minded switch gets flipped in her, and I come home and I say, "Whoa, you're cooking. What's the occasion? You made dinner." And she says, "That's not for you." And she almost always actually makes some for me when she cooks for other people, almost always. So how about you? Open your eyes. Who around you needs you to serve them a meal? Or better yet, share a meal. You know, many of the great moments in Jesus' teachings happened around a dinner where somebody invited Jesus over or gathered around a table, and the conversation almost always produced something good. Pretty much every week, I have a meal or two with somebody around me who just needs to talk or needs somebody to listen or needs a friend. There's something about having those kinds of conversations over a meal that makes it easier. I don't know why. I've got this favorite little Mexican place that isn't very expensive, and I often rendezvous with somebody there who just needs some time. I've eaten truckloads of tortillas there, but served people along the way by sharing a meal. So take a meal or share one. Second, send a note. You can take a meal. You can send a note. Your Bible is made up of two sections, two big pieces. The first piece is the Hebrew Bible, often called the Old Testament. And the second piece is the New Testament. That tells the story of Jesus and the early church. The New Testament is made up largely of letters, notes that were written by someone to someone. And many of these, at least in part, are a form of encouragement. Let me show you one of my favorites. It's Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. And he opens that letter like this: "I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, and being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus." Wow, what a way to encourage somebody. I imagine that those original hearers of Paul's words, they would feel affirmed and inspired to keep doing what they were doing, to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep their faith strong. So for you, words might not be the most important thing, but words are important at some level for everyone. I believe there's great power in sending a note, and I use all the tools at my disposal to do this. I send texts, I send cards, I send private messages on social media if that's where the person I'm trying to talk to primarily communicates. I occasionally use email, although 70% of emails are never open, so I'm a little cautious there. A note can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. It can be short, something like, "Thinking of you today." It can be a special, specific affirmation like, "You know what I admire about you is the way that you." It can and often should be spiritual. Something like, "I want you to know that I prayed for you today." By the way, I often say it exactly like that, and only if I actually did pray for them that day. I don't usually say, "I'm praying for you," because too many times we say the words but never actually do pray for them, that is. So I'd rather actually pray and then tell the person that I spoke to the King on their behalf that day. I also send handwritten notes the old-fashioned way, through the mail, which is really not easy for me because my handwriting is super bad. And I have to laboriously write at a painfully slow pace so that you can actually decipher the words that I wrote on the card or the paper. But for me, this is a labor of love. It's one that is almost always received exactly like I intended it, as a word of affirmation, encouragement, care, and thanks. In 2012, I went on sabbatical. Our church was 10 years old then, and I decided that the church gave me 89 days to rest and reflect and re-envision. And I decided that for 89 days, every one of them, I would send a note to somebody who had invested in me, made a difference in my spiritual life. Now, I didn't make my goal. I sent something like 64 handwritten notes. And those notes were life-giving, not just for me, but for the people who received them. I got calls and connected with people I hadn't talked to in a long time, some of them not even decades. And it was amazing, the power of the written note. So send a note. What if we all decided that as a way of serving others, we would send a single note every day, even if it's just in the form of a text, to encourage and affirm people around us? If we all did that, thousands of notes would lift people out of their suffering and inspire them because we served them with an expression of care. Lastly, carry a towel. That's what Jesus did. So Jesus, got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing. He wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus specifically chose to care for his disciples this way, and it's one of the best examples of what a servant looks like. Jesus, who deserved to be treated like a king because he was one, stooped to the place of a servant, and not just any servant, but the lowest one, the entry-level position, the bottom of the scale. In humility, Jesus gets down on his knees and washes the feet of his closest followers. And this happened not in 2022 when our feet might smell a little, but would be relatively clean after being in a shoe all day. No, their feet would be covered in the mess that animals drop on the paths that they share together, barely shielded by their open-air sandals. It was filthy work in the truest sense of the word. And not only does Jesus do it, but he uses the towel around his waist to dry their feet when he's done. And then the remarkable part, the application part for you and me, is what he says next. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, no messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. When I read this text, I think about a story. Forgive me if you've heard this before. I think about my friend Jerry Clay. 8 years ago, I went to see Jerry in the hospital. He was an old man and he was dying. I sat with Jerry. And as we talked, I noticed that there was a tray of eggs and bacon in front of him. It was there when I got there. There was a plastic cup of orange juice, still sealed under the little aluminum foil lid. The plasticware was still wrapped in the napkin. None of the food had been touched at all. And he never touched it while I was there. And after a while, it just became a little awkward. And I thought Jerry was being polite, not wanting to eat in front of me. So I finally said, hey, Jerry, listen, it's okay, man. Go ahead. Go ahead and eat your breakfast. And he looked away. It felt like a long time. And then he looked back at me and he said, I can't lift my hands. I can't lift my fork to my mouth. And I said, Jerry, would you like me to feed you? And he said, you shouldn't have to feed me. I guess he thought pastors didn't or shouldn't do such things. So I got up from where I was sitting and I took a step closer and I said to him, I'd be honored to feed you your breakfast today. And one bite at a time, in one of the holiest moments of my life. I did for him what he could no longer do for himself. And I wiped his mouth at times, and I held the juice to his lips at times. That's what it looks like to carry a towel. And I don't always get it right, but I know this: the world would be better and our lives would be better if we would own a towel, sometimes drape it around our waist, and wash someone's feet, or feed them their eggs, or carry in their groceries, or scrape their driveway, or 1,000 other ways that you can carry a towel. There's no shortage of needs. And the world needs more people who are willing to serve others. So I'm going to ask you if you'd bow your head and let me pray with you now. God, so many of us, we just get wrapped up, myself included, we just get wrapped up in this world that is wrapped up in itself, self-promoting, looking for ways to move their own lives forward and ignoring the needs around them. Help us see the world with your eyes. Help us have a servant's mindset. Help us identify as servant people, people who follow you and who are more like you. And we thank you, Lord, for speaking to us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Take a meal, send a note, carry a towel. Because in a world that has lost its way in pathological selfishness, followers of Jesus are called to be the opposite. We are called to be selfless. This week, you can do it. Let's do it together. Take a meal, send a note, carry a towel. Let me know how you're doing. I would love to hear your stories, and we'll see you next week.